Testing, testing. Sounds like it's on. It is 7:08. There are 252 town meeting members and 127 constitutes a quorum. The constable informs me that a quorum is present. The second session of the 256th annual town meeting will now come to order. I'm going to wait till the end of my notes and comments and then see if there's any new members to swear in, just in case any come in after I have these comments. Quick schedule review for the next 2 weeks. We are meeting on Mondays and Wednesdays. Maybe we'll be done by then, maybe not, who knows. But the next one after tonight is next Wednesday. Reminder about tally cards. The first night you checked in, you received a packet of red and green tally vote cards to be used for the duration of town meeting. Please remember to bring your cards with you to future sessions. Hopefully you brought them tonight. If you forgot your cards, you can get a blank set from the check-in table now. You must write in your name and precinct number on each card. Tally vote cards without names will not be counted. Hold on a sec, please. We need a volunteer microphone wrangler for the stage left audience right side of things, somebody who's quick on their feet, and see Nani there if you want to be that volunteer. Seating, quick notes about seating. And I'm going to give these notes tonight. I gave them last time, and then after this I'm going to mostly assume people get it, and I'll try and do a more abbreviated version. The seats on the floor of the auditorium may be occupied only by town meeting members, except for the front row, which may be used by members of the press and by members of town committees and town staff participating in the presentation or discussion of articles. Such persons must wear non-voter stickers, which are available at the check-in table. The seats in the front row of this section over here are reserved for those who are on deck. If the next article is one that you will be presenting or expect to be questioned on, please come forward and sit in one of these seats before the vote on the current article. The seats in front of me on the right are occupied by the select board, the town manager, the finance director, the assistant to the town manager, and an administrative assistant from the town manager's office. The finance committee is seated to my left. Spectators and town residents who are not town meeting members may be seated in the bleachers to the rear of the auditorium. New information for town meeting members can be found on the back table to my left, the one that you entered and checked in at. Old information can be found on the back table to my right. I do want to note that Part 2 of the Finance Committee report is currently on the back table, but it had a late arrival. It didn't get here till around 5 of 7. So if you came early, which I wholeheartedly approve of, you might not have it. So if you don't have Part 2 of the FinCom report, you can pick it up from that back table. Amherst Media provides gavel-to-gavel coverage of our proceedings on Public Access Channel 17. I would like to thank their staff and volunteers. They do an amazing job. Videos of town meeting sessions are replayed frequently, can also be viewed on the Amherst Media website. If you wish to speak, you must raise your hand and be recognized. When appropriate, please hold up a red or green card to indicate pro or con on the issue. When you are called on, please first state your name and precinct. If you forget, I will interrupt and ask you to do so. If you need more than 3 minutes or more than 5 when speaking to a motion, you must request additional time before speaking, and town meeting will vote on your request. If you're speaking from the floor, please speak into a microphone that will be provided once you are recognized. This will allow viewers outside of the auditorium to hear you. The microphone will be on when it is handed to you. Please hold it close to your mouth when you speak. Non-members who wish to speak should stand at the rear of the right-hand aisle, the one that's directly in front of me. Any registered voter of the town of Amherst who is recognized by the moderator may speak without special permission. Others may speak with the permission of a majority. If you're making an amendment to a motion, the amendment must be presented in writing with 4 copies submitted to the following people or groups: the town clerk, the moderator, town manager and staff, and the chair of the finance committee, or whichever board is seated to my left. Copy machine is located at the end of the table to my right. This may be used to make copies of amendments. Procedural motions, such as a motion to refer or a motion to dismiss, do not need to be presented in writing. If you're making an amendment to a portion of the operating budget, please specify the dollar amount greater or less than the amount in the Finance Committee motion. If you make any motion from the floor, it must be the first thing you do after you have been recognized and have identified yourself. You cannot speak first and then make a motion. If you've not already done so, please check your cell phone and make sure it is silenced or turned off. Town Meeting Coordinating Committee will be holding elections during the 5th town meeting session on May 12th. There are 4 vacancies to the committee. If you wish to be a member or if you wish to nominate someone else, nomination papers can be downloaded from the town website. If you're not able to download the papers, they are available here at town meeting. The nomination deadline is May 6th at 4:30 p.m. You can submit nomination papers and candidate statements here at town meeting or at the town clerk's office. This is an important committee that is working hard to educate and inform town meeting members and to improve the process of town meeting. Please participate as a voter or as a candidate. If at any point in time you are confused about the proceedings, it is appropriate to call a point of order and ask for a clarification. Also, it is always okay to phone me, send me an email, or see me prior to town meeting if you need an explanation of any kind. You may notice 2 attractive barrels here and random drips of water coming from the ceiling. Please be careful if you're approaching the podium not to trip or crash into things. We obviously have a water leak, so just be careful if you're going up to the podium. One last important message before I swear people and we begin, and that is we left a little bit of a mess on Monday night. And that makes me pretty unhappy. It's extra work for the custodians. They're already working hard and doing a great job. They shouldn't need to clean up our mess. So I ask everybody to do 2 things. First, try and clean up all of your own stuff and make sure you take it with you. And second, check your whole aisle. And if you see anybody else's stuff, clean that up too. Let's try and leave this place perfect when we leave tonight. Okay, so now, if there are any new members who were not sworn in Monday night, I ask you to please rise at this time. We've got a few. Do you swear that you, so I'm going to swear you in now. Do you swear that you will faithfully and impartially perform the duties of town meeting member? Please answer, I do. Thank you and congratulations. Okay, now, whatever. Okay, we now have a procedural motion I'm calling on Ms. Appy to make. I assume she's here somewhere. Catherine Appy? Yes. And if we can get that up on the screen, that would be good too.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I move to consider Articles 17 and 18 on May 7th, 2014 at 7:10 p.m.
I hear a second. You may speak to your motion.
Thank you. This scheduling change would allow the schools to provide more information to town meeting members, which will inform our discussion about Articles 17 and 18 based on input from the Amherst School Committee last night, which met last night.
And just to clarify, the reason you see that peculiar little 7:10 is because we've already moved 2 things to 7:05 on May 7th, which are the Amherst and the Amherst Pelham and the regional school budget portions of Article 12. So we make this a slightly later time because we're saying we're going to do this after we do the budgets for the Amherst Pelham and for the regional schools. Any discussion or questions before we come to a vote? I see no hands. We will now come to a vote. This is a majority to pass this procedural motion. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, please say no. The ayes have it unanimously. We now move to the conservation and development portion of Article 12, which is the FY 2015 operating budget. I hear a point of order. Please rise and wait for a microphone if you have a point of order.
Jim Perrott, Precinct 1. I believe we never finished the community services part of the budget.
I believe we did.
Well, no, we never got things like licensing and permits and fines and all of that part of the budget.
What I think you're referring to is reviewing the source of funds line items, which
yes,
I don't
that's correct. We never got it any to that part.
I'm pretty sure that last year, and I can do this differently moving forward. So first of all, the short answer to your question is, even though I didn't specifically read through them, we did vote on that budget and we passed it already. What I did last year and what I was planning on doing is just stepping through and reviewing the line items of the money we're spending, and then I do give us time at the end if people have questions about anything else on the budget. If the sense of town meeting would be helpful, I could step through those line items when we move forward. But as far as the community services section of the budget, we did already complete it. I did, after we'd gone through the line items, I did open it up for questions, and that's when a motion was made. So we did already pass the budget. So we can't really go back to that. Yeah, I hear another point of order.
James Scott, Precinct 7. What is currently the bottom line of this section in community service? It was, the Finance Committee recommended $1,778,749, and then there was the amendment for $125,000 on top of that.
Yes, what we voted for, and it was on the board when we voted it on Monday, we increased that amount by $125,000.
Thank you.
Okay, on to conservation and development. I call on Ms. Swartz for a motion. And actually, before you begin, there is a Toyota Camry with its lights on. License plate is 38AZ67. Okay, you may continue now.
I move that the town raise and appropriate $1,161,383 for conservation and development.
I hear a second. You may speak to your motion.
We recommend this article was recommended unanimously by the Finance Committee. The budget for this functional area increases by 13% for two reasons. First, the salaries of existing staff members who had previously been paid by the Community Development Block Grant, which the town is no longer receiving, will now be paid from the general fund. Full-time equivalent positions increased by 1.19 because of that change, but the actual number of people in the Planning and Conservation Department remains the same. Second, the inspection services budget increases by 13.2% to fund a full year of salaries for the new inspector and administrative assistant hired in January to implement the rental registration program. The additional costs for these two positions will be covered entirely by rental registration fees. Conservation and development staff members are coordinating efforts to secure affordable housing at Rolling Green Apartments. They are working to complete the Olympia Oaks affordable housing projects and CPA-funded projects including affordable housing at the Hawthorne site and the acquisition of conservation farmland on Belchertown Road. They administer town funds for emergency assistance, the Amherst Survival Center, and Craig's Doors Shelter. They implement zoning changes made by town meeting, and they are working on the town gown study and the housing production plan. Several development projects proposed or underway are monitored by this department to ensure they are consistent with the town's bylaws and regulations. Some of them are Olympia Place, Olympia Oaks, Kendrick Place, the Trolley Barn in North Amherst, West Street Mixed Use Development, also known as Laverdier Building, The Retreat, numerous projects at Amherst College and UMass, and green buildings at Hampshire College and for the Hitchcock Center. Conservation and Development is the main grant writing department for the town and has brought in nearly $6 million since 2008. It is this department that is planning for the town's next community development block grant application. It has coordinated all of the town's efforts to become and remain a green community, and it organizes the annual Sustainability Festival.
Thank you. And now a statement from the Select Board. Ms. Brewer?
On Monday night, you thought you were going to get off easy because I said...
Microphone working?
Doesn't sound like.
There you
Maybe
go.
it is.
Now it is.
Okay. Thought you were going to get off easy because I said, oh, I don't think we'll need to be recognized on these individual items, but evidently we do. I just want to point out that when the budget that you're seeing here, the first official statement that the select board makes on their budget in each cycle is the policy guidelines to the town manager back in November, which is also around the same time the finance committee puts out their guidelines to the town manager as to how the next year's budget's going to work. Those guidelines included, again, our ongoing concern about how to fund staff without support by the administration portion of the block grant. We knew that we had staff that we had before we had a block grant. We knew that we had staff we needed to continue having whether or not we had a block grant. The town manager presented a budget in January that completed the gradual select board requested shift of already paid existing staff that had existed prior to this, to operating rather than grant funds. We knew this was coming. We asked for this to happen on purpose. You're going to want to hear more about what all the different staff does, and the Finance Committee's already touched on that both in their report, verbally, and in writing. I want to speak very briefly as to what I, as a select board member, see in terms of the staff who currently support the block grant administration, because that is the specific hot button issue here, talking about moving that staff to operations. That staff will be administering the money that you put into social services on Monday night. They will be doing that without any support from the block grant administration funds because there won't be any. So the administration still has to happen. As we talked about Monday night, we don't just write a check to these agencies and they go off and everything's done. There is actual administration involved. The staff did not just work on block grant. That's not what this is. This is pieces of various people. One person who works on block grant also happens to support all the other things, many of the other things that you town meeting have said you want them to be engaged in. For example, affordable housing, disability access, historic preservation. I'm familiar with one staff member who works on Housing and Sheltering Committee, Block Grant Advisory, Disability Access Advisory, Historical Commission, Dickinson Local Historical Commission. These are just things I know this person does in addition to the actual administration of the social services money. And I know you'll want to hear more about some of these details from staff, and I know the town manager and his staff have graphs and lots of numbers available for you.
And could you just state the select board recommendation?
The select board's original recommendation, as was written in our revised 428 thing, was we unanimously supported the recommendation.
Thank you. And this vote is a majority vote, and page 23 of the Finance Committee report has the conservation and development line items. And I now call on Mr. O'Connor, who has a motion to make. Mr. O'Connor?
Yep.
I already called on you, yeah.
Yep. Vince O'Connor, Precinct 1. I move to decrease the bottom line of the Planning and Development section of the FY 2015 operating budget by $100,000.
Do I hear a second? I hear a second. Can we get that motion up on the screen? Okay, we're typing it. We're getting there. If you don't object, Mr. O'Connor, you can be, actually, we'll wait till we get it up on the screen.
Well,
It's better that way.
let me wait.
Thank you. Mr. O'Connor, you have 5 minutes to speak to your motion.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Monday, I pointed out that the town's failure to apply for a CDBG grant in February had stranded a couple of costs. We have heard an explanation from the Select Board about the fact that that cost was going to be added to the budget anyway. My problem with both the explanation in the Finance Committee booklet and this explanation is that that the social service budget, which was also stranded, was not proposed to be included in the operating budget, but one-time funded from reserve funds. One of the ways that I'm hoping that one of the things that I'm hoping this motion will do is make it clear that, and make it possible for no reserve funds to be used in this operating budget, and for the social services money, which affects thousands of town residents, as opposed to the CDBG full-time equivalents. And I recognize that 1.19 or 2.5 full-time equivalents represent bits and pieces of lots of people's time. That there won't be any discussion this fall about what shall we do about social services. That will be embedded in the budget. There won't be any reserve fund issue. The reason this motion is for $100,000 is because, one, general government has benefits that are associated with these full-time equivalent positions, and two, both the Select Board and if the motion succeeds, both the Select Board and the town manager will decide how the reduction is allocated, and you can't know in advance really how to do, but there will be some money in general government that will, in all likelihood, not be spent. So that's my expression of concern about the social services CDBG program. The other concern I have is the larger concern about the direction that the planning department is headed. And that has to do with primarily with the zoning proposals that we receive every year, which are really focused, if you think about it, on one simple aspect of the 7-month economy, the student-based economy, which is housing. That focus, I think, is not good for the town. We need a planning department that focuses on a 12-month economy, an economy that's really involved in the year-round residents of the town, that will help us reverse the trend, the downward trend that has happened with respect to the departure of people in the child-rearing ages, losing 40% of our child-rearing age population, 25 to 44, since 1990, and which has depopulated and in many ways impoverished and imperiled our schools, as you may find out later when we discuss the Wildwood grant application. So, but that direction, I think, is very mistaken. I think until we see and as a result of that direction, we have lost many jobs. 2 of our largest private employers have moved to Hadley, and many of our small businesses that started in Amherst have moved to Hadley and Northampton. And all the while, we have had essentially this barrage of singularly focused proposals, really focused on the 7-month economy and only the undergraduate housing focus of the 7-month economy in the last 3 to 5 years. If this town is going to remain a good place for families, we're going to have to change that focus. And I think the only way to send a convincing message to the leadership of the town to change that focus is to vote this amendment, and give them a sense of direction that I think, unfortunately, has been lacking. Thank you.
Motion is before you to decrease the bottom line of the operating budget for planning and development. When we do finally come to a vote, we will first vote on the larger amount, and if that fails, we would then vote on this amount. And is there any discussion before we come to a vote? Actually, we're going to talk about line items first, so forget that I just said that. Yes, I hear a point of order. Wait for the microphone, please.
Amy Middleman, Precinct 5. Did Mr. O'Connor mean to decrease the budget by $100,000 or $200,000?
It was by 100,000. That's what the motion was that he handed to us, and that's what's on the screen.
He's raising his hand.
No. Okay, now he is. You know what? The point of order is what was the motion? The motion was to decrease by $100,000. That's what he submitted in writing, so that's the answer. Yes, Mr. O'Connor. Microphone, please.
Just want to clarify that.
Excuse me. A point of order was asked as opposed to a question, and I answered the point of order, so I don't believe any clarification is necessary. Was your motion to decrease by 100,000?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I think
that is the correct
I will
motion.
recognize you if you have other questions or other statements later, but I want to talk to other people first. So I'm going to first go through the line items of the budget, and then we will open it up to general questions about the budget as a whole and the pros or cons of decreasing the budget. So are there any questions on the conservation line item in the budget? I see no hands. On the planning section of the budget? Yes, I see a hand right there. If we can, right behind you, Nan.
Michael Burkhardt, Precinct 6. I'm in the town budget document, pages 87 through 89, deals with the planning department. And it's really hard to understand what we've really accomplished in a year, because one of the main goals of the planning department is to implement the master plan. And that's got 7 items, key items in it. And the report is not organized so I can find out what we've done in terms of advancing any of those items. There's lots of items in there mentioned, but it's an old, anybody can produce a report. And what's helpful when you're trying to evaluate how we've spent our money is, what have we accomplished according to those 7 objectives with the activities that are listed? Not only that, how much resources went into each activity? Because that also is something, as a decision maker, want to know how we've apportioned our money. So I would really love some more information about that, because without it, this is not something I want to improve.
Any more questions or discussion on the planning line item in the budget? I see no hands. Any questions or comments on the inspection services line item in the budget? Where? I must be going blind. Yes, right there.
Kenton Thar, Precinct 1. One question is, how much does the rental registration program bring in a year, assuming it covers $61,231, which is the reason given for that increase? And the second question is once it's fully implemented, which it seems to be at this point, are we still going to need that position just to carry it out? Does it really take a full-time position, it seems like, to keep the rental registration program going?
Anybody want to respond to that? And keep in mind that no one's required to, but I'm going to check to make sure. Mr. Masanti?
Thank you. And Mr. Pooler is searching for the budgeted revenue related to the rental permitting program. When the fees were established through the efforts of our and recommendations from our Safe and Healthy Neighborhoods Working Group, the objective was to cover approximately 3/4 of the cost of that program through user fees with the balance from general taxation. I don't have a year-to-date figure at my fingertips just yet, but we're on pace to do just that. Just in the first 120 days of the program, over 80% of the rental properties subject to the new bylaw have either applied and obtained a permit or applied and are in the midst of having the permit approved. There's an awful lot of work. There's certainly, in the startup of such a program, there's incredible amounts of work in year one. It's a complaint-driven system, but there's also a lot of one-on-one work with individual permit applicants to help them document their submittal and get the appropriate review and approval. So there's a strong belief that there's ongoing administrative and inspectional hours needed to make it work well.
Thank you. Yes, front row right here.
Larry Kelly, Precinct 5. I was at a meeting this afternoon in Town Hall with Rob Mora, and he said, as of today, just a little over 1,000 of the 1,300 that need to register, 1,000 had registered, did the paperwork, paid the fee, and I believe the fee is $100. So that's pretty simple math. That means it's taken in, as of today, $100,000.
Any more comments or questions on inspection services? Yes, in the back row there.
I actually,
Identify yourself, please.
Pat Church, Precinct 5. This is actually partly a question for you. I have a question about planning that I raised my hand just as you moved on. So can I ask a question about the planning?
Absolutely.
Okay. My question, I have been in town meeting a long time, and I remember some numbers from a few years ago on how many planning staff there are. And I'm wondering if you could tell us again how many planning staff there are. And do you know in any equivalent town size-wise, do you have any information on a normal number of planning staff, whatever normal might be?
Anybody?
I know having a university is kind of complicates it and all that.
Anybody care to comment on planning staff size? Mr. Masanti.
In the recommended budget, we have 4.8 full-time equivalent planning department staff in the budget, and as a matter of comparison, looking back over 20 years in the town of Amherst, we have fewer staff in the planning department than we did throughout the throughout the period 1996 to 2009, and like a number of other town departments in 2009 with the Great Recession, there was a reduction in planning staff. At that point, we have been able, over some portions of the last 4 fiscal years, be able to fill portions of 3 staff people using the CDBG grant. And that bar graph is up on the screen. So you see on the far right the proposed FY15 staffing level is level staffing, but it's all green, meaning there's not CDBG funding support, so there's no net increase there. But it's also the overall staffing level is actually lower than it was before we had the grant 5-6 years ago. And if you go back many, many years, we're at a lower level. And I think given the very long list of issues that are central, I think, to the issues that we're working on as a town: affordable housing, sustainability, town gown, our housing production plan, mixed-use development, attempting to put into action the principles of the master plan, which does include some of the zoning that town meeting has approved, including some greater density in the downtown district. which directly contributed to the success of projects like the Lord Jeffrey Inn, like Bullwood Place, and we think over the coming year, Kendrick Place, next to Bertucci's. So it is making a difference, and I would strongly encourage you to support the recommended budget.
And Mr. Pooler, you have a tiny bit to add to that?
I wanted to answer the previous gentleman's question about how much money was going from the fees into the inspections budget, and the number is $60,736.
Thank you. Yes, right down here in the corner.
Thanks. Phil Jackson, Precinct 10. So the question around whether or not Amherst has a comparably sized staff on its planning department, I'm curious, how many town boards and committees does the town of Amherst have compared to other municipalities? And of those boards and committees that Amherst has that focus on issues that are germane to this department, how many bodies do they support? And what would the total number of man-hours be on a regular basis that are required to support those citizen boards and committees?
I'd be amazed if anybody could answer that, but if anybody wants to give it a try. Mr. Masanti?
I'm looking up at the far right corner of the room for a more precise answer. I know the answer is a lot. From all the traditional boards like Planning Board, Zoning Board of Appeals, but the many other committees that have been created and are very vital to our work, housing and sheltering in recent years, Disability Access Commission, and there's many, many others. And I think the budget document that was referred to has a long list: a Design Review Board, Town Gown Study Committee. We've had other planning projects on Kendrick Park, North Common, Atkins Corner, any number of committees, all which require staff time. Historical Commission.
Hang on, before we go any farther on this, I just want to check, is there anybody who has any questions about any of the sources of funds line items? Just want to make sure we cover everything. Okay, and then Mr. Scott, earlier you said you'd want to speak, so I'm calling on you now.
Jim Scott, Precinct 7. I rise to urge you to vote for the larger number, the budget number that has been proposed by the Finance Committee, and excludes the amendment of that has been proposed. The budget process is one that encompasses about 6 months' worth of work, including the Select Board's proposal, the Finance Committee's proposal, to design and create a budget to meet the needs, or try to meet the needs. Because there are limited funds and there are expanded needs, there are needs that are not met by the budget that has been presented to you. This proposal to reduce the budget by 10%, $100,000 taken away from 1 million something, is about 10%. That's not the way you create budgets. You create budgets by careful planning and evaluating the many times conflicting needs and limited resources, and coming to a recommendation to our body, the town meeting, with their best judgment as to what we should allocate for our town needs. So I strongly urge you to vote for the budget as it was presented, which will be the first thing we vote on, the higher figure. And that's about what all I have to say. Let good sense regain.
Is there further discussion before we come to a vote? Yes, right here in the middle.
Jim Barat, Precinct 1. I'd like to point out to people that the expenses of Amherst have been increasing, or the taxes of Amherst have been increasing about 5% a year for the last 5 years. How many of you are getting a 5% increase every year? Anybody? I doubt it. Now, sometimes we have to draw the line and say, we can't just keep raising taxes more and more and more. So please, let's reduce this budget by 100,000.
Yes, in the back over there.
Bear Tierkel, Precinct 4. I agree with the original motion when it was said that the town is unfortunately focused too much on the 7-month economy. And I think that indeed we need to be investing more in the segment of the economy that is non-higher ed. Investing in economic development of bringing in jobs and bringing in people that are not reliant wholly on the higher ed sector. I think we need to diversify our town. I think we need to be less reliant on higher ed. I think the way to do that is the opposite of what has been recommended here. I think that this department in particular is where you make an additional investment towards economic development, towards planning, towards putting together a cohesive strategy to give the town direction that develops the economy into a 12-month economy and away from a 7-month economy. I don't understand the logic of saying we need more work in economic development for a 12-month economy, and let's cut the budget of the department in our town government that is responsible for those tasks. That doesn't make sense to me. I actually would be much more in favor of a motion to increase this budget by $100,000. The previous speaker talked about how expensive the taxes in this town are becoming unbearable for some. I agree 100%. Our taxes are ever increasing to cover our expenses, not to mention the $90 million liability that we're ignoring from Monday night. We need more economic activity as an alternative revenue stream from each citizen in this town paying more taxes. And this is the department that helps us gain strategy towards solving that problem. I would highly encourage everybody to vote for the higher amount here, and I would certainly support increasing this budget to hire a full-time economic development director that can help lead that effort.
Thank you. Way back over there. That's you, yeah.
I'm Julie Marcus, Precinct 8. I encourage you to vote for the budget as originally written. I work in environmental consulting. I am on the Board of Health. I'm also the Vice President of the Chamber of Commerce. I have an opportunity to interact with planning, conservation, and inspection services on a lot of different levels. I also own one of those companies Bear referred to that is not tied to the education economy. We are a 12-month business. I would argue that these departments, as opposed to what Mr. O'Connor said, are part of what make living in Amherst attractive to families. It's part of our safe, healthy, comfortable place to live, are the services offered by these departments. I work with these people all the time. They're incredibly efficient and hardworking. And I also agree with Bear that if we want a more 12-month economy, we are dependent on these people to bring it to us. So I encourage you to vote on the budget as proposed.
I'd like to remind everybody when you're speaking to make an effort for no names, refer to the previous speaker or the maker of the motion as opposed to people's names. It's just a better way of doing things. Let's see. Yes, right here, third row. You, yes. Motion for the previous question has been made. We will now come to immediate vote. If 2/3 of you vote yes, we will then come to a vote on the main motion. Can we get the main motion back up on the screen? Great. Everybody with me now? We're voting on the motion to end debate. All those in favor of the motion for the previous question, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, please say no. No. Moderator hears 2/3. If you doubt it, let's try voice vote once more with everybody talking in a very nice, calm, modulated voice, and we'll see if there's still a doubt. All those in favor of the motion for the previous question, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say no. No. Moderator still hears 2/3. Is there still a doubt? I hear somebody saying I doubt it, so we will have a standing vote. Can I have my tellers up here, please? Everybody else stay seated. I'll give you instructions in just a second. Do I have my 6 tellers? Can you come on up, please? Okay, you guys. Okay. We will now have all people who are voting yes on the motion for the previous question to stand and remain standing. If you're standing, then you are voting yes to end debate. Thank you. On the left, you may be seated. Moderator, in the center, there are 26 yes votes. 26 yes votes in the center. In the center, you may be seated. You can yell it out from there. On the right, we have 47 yes votes. You may be seated on the right. Now, all those opposed to the motion for the previous question, please stand and remain standing. On the right, we have 5 no votes. On the right, you may be seated. In the center, there are 23 no votes. You may be seated in the center. On the left, we have 22 no votes. You may be seated on the left. Do my math twice here. There are 103 yes votes and 50 no votes. We have achieved 2/3. Motion for the previous question has passed. We will now come to an immediate vote on the higher amount. We are now voting that the town raise and appropriate $1,161,383 for conservation. I hear a point of order. No, the way we do the, well, it's a good question. Let me explain to everybody. The way we do our budget articles is if there's an amendment to increase or reduce the bottom line, we basically have 2 numbers before us, or sometimes 3 numbers before us, and we vote on the highest number first. If that fails, we vote on the next one, and so on. But as soon as one passes, we are done with that article altogether. So in this case, we're not voting on an amendment, we're voting on the higher amount. So the vote we're about to take is the vote to raise and appropriate $1,161,383 for conservation and development. This is a majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say no. No. The ayes have it. If there are 15 requests, we'll have a tally. I see 1 so far. That's all I see. We're moving on. We are now moving on to general government, and I call on Mr. Sharma to make a motion, and let's get that motion up on the screen.
I move that the town appropriate $6,333,845 for general government, that the salary of the moderator be fixed at $100, that of the select board at $300 each, and that of the elector under the Oliver Smith will at $20, and that to meet such appropriation, $6,225,572 be raised by taxation, and $108,273,000 be transferred from the ambulance receipts reserved for appropriation account.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
I hear a second. You may speak to your motion.
The general government budget increased just under $29,000, or 0.5%, to $6.3 million. The FTE was 28.25, unchanged from FY15. The general government is the second largest function after public safety in the town's operating budget. This area is responsible for collecting and administering the entire budget of the town, about $80 million. The general government includes the bulk of the general administrative costs of managing and operating the town. This budget includes departments such as Select Board, Town Manager's Office, Town Meeting, Finance Committee, Finance Department, Legal Services, Human Resources, Human Rights, Employee Benefits, Information Technology, Town Clerk's Office, Elections and Registration, Facilities, Maintenance, and General Services. Employee benefits, not including retirement, account for over 50% of the general government budget.
Thank you. Does the Select Board have a statement on this portion of the budget? Yes, Ms. Brewer.
The select board voted to recommend, select board, the mic does not like me tonight. The select board voted to recommend this budget 5-0 unanimously, as is written in our report, and I have to stand just at the right moment. I just want to draw your attention real quick to two items in the Finance Committee report, and one was also in your town meeting packets. Remember that we do have a small town meeting child care dependent care allowance, so if you've been meaning to turn in your expenses for that, please do so. The other thing I wanted to draw your attention to is that there is new first-time funding of $1,500 for Human Rights Commission expenses. And just in case you were wondering, all those wonderful committees that we talk about over and over, almost none of them have any budget other than the legal expenses when they have hearings that have to be published in the newspaper. So when we have a committee that actually wants to do anything, they generally have to pass the hat. So this is one of the very isolated cases where we're putting a tiny bit of money into an actual committee's work, and that's the Human Rights Commission.
Thank you. And this also is a majority vote, and I'm looking at page 24 of the Finance Committee booklet, and that's where the line items are, and I'm going to quickly go through them to see if people have specific questions before we open it up to general conversation. Select Board Town Manager. I see no hands. Town Meeting Finance Committee. I see no hands. Finance Department. I see no hands. Legal Services. Human Resources, Human Rights. Nothing. Information Technology. Yes, right there, third row from the back on the aisle.
Hilda Greenbaum, Precinct 1. Since there is a budget item, $1,500 for human rights, and no other committee gets any money, what will this money be used for?
Can somebody answer where we use the human rights line item money? Oh, the committee's $1,500. Mr. Mersanti?
Yes, that funding was requested by the Human Rights Commission, and it's a small amount of money allocated to further their work with speakers and other special events, because one of their primary roles in the community is increasing awareness and getting all of us to really dialogue with each other more than we do.
Thank you. Information technology, were there any questions? Elections and registrations. See no hands. Facilities maintenance. See no hands. General services. Employee pay benefits. Any questions or comments on any of the source of funds line items? Any further discussion before we come to a vote? I see no hands. Oh, I do see a hand. Second row from the back there.
Mary Wentworth, Precinct 5. In looking over this part of the budget as well as the other parts, I have to say that I am rather shocked that there is so little attention paid to the crises that we are facing in this country, particularly one of climate change, but also one of the rapidly depleting resources of our planet. I think that we need to begin to fashion a budget that will take us through the rest of the first half of this century in terms of how we are going to make it possible for life to survive on this earth. And I am really, really appalled.
Is there further discussion before we come to a vote? I see no hands. We will now come to a vote on the motion. What's that? We will now come to a vote on the motion on the screen here. This is a majority vote. All those in favor of the motion before you, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, please say no. Moderator hears that the ayes have it. We now move on to debt service. And I call on Mr. Sharma for the motion.
I move that the town appropriate $2,038,170 for payment of the town's general fund indebtedness, and to meet such appropriation, $1,856,897 be raised by taxation and $181,273 be appropriated and transferred from Community Preservation Fund annual revenues.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
I do. You may speak to your motion.
As of March 2014, total outstanding debt for the town was $19.2 million. All is bond debt, with bonds maturing between 3 and 20 years. The town does not have bank debt or lines of credit. In 2014, the town issued $3.3 million in new debt at an average rate of 2.61% and retired last service payment, original issue face value of $2.6 million. We do not have risky instruments such as derivatives, and the state law limits the town to a narrow range of debt instruments. For that reason, the town's balance sheet, quote unquote, is very strong. Now, is $19 million a lot or a little? Neither. The debt service in FY15 is projected to be just over $2 million, which is about 4.5% of just the property taxes for FY14. Or another way to look at this is property taxes are more than 22 times the expected debt service next year. So the town's debt load is reasonable and manageable. Of the $2 million in debt service for FY15, $1.9 million, or 91%, is funded through taxation, and the remaining $181,000, or about 10%, with the CPF funds. The total increase of $79,000 in debt service represents a 4% increase over debt service from last year. Here are some other main points to remember. Road construction and maintenance account for almost 1/3 of total debt service. School-related renovations account for 27.5% of the total. Renovations of the town hall, just over 11%. The CPA funds play a significant role in debt service for recreation, housing, and land acquisition. No debt service is projected for the libraries for the next year. The Finance Committee voted to recommend this article 6-0.
Thank you. Ms. Brewer, do you have a statement for the Select Board? No statement, just what's written in your information. This is a vote requirement of a majority. You can view the line items of this section on page 26 of the Finance Committee book. I'm not going to go through them one by one. Instead, I'm going to open this up to any questions on the floor of anything regarding general fund indebtedness. Are there any comments or questions? Yes, I see a hand back there, blue shirt.
Ken Hargraves, 2nd Precinct. Have older debt bonds been looked at to refinance to bring down the lower interest rates?
I'd like to refer that question to Mr. Pooler.
Oh, who wants to answer? Mr. Pooler?
Yes, we did a refinance last year. We don't have any ones that are eligible for refinance at this time. We do work every year with our financial advisor from Unibank, who helps us put out our bond offerings to see when we have eligible refinancings. And we, with a lower rate environment, every chance we've had to do that over the last few years, we have. There just aren't any that happen to be coming up right now.
Is there further discussion? Yes, in the back there.
Vince O'Connor, Precinct 1. I did raise this question at a town gown committee meeting, and it does seem to me this is the bonds for repair of roads. were the first ones that I think were issued in the long time I've been in town meeting. And I wonder two things. One, does Mr. Pooler or the town manager or anyone know how many other towns have had to issue bonds for road repairs? How usual a process is this? And two, is there some way that we can, we have a water fund and a sewer fund and a solid waste fund and so forth. We did have a golf course fund. Is there some way that we could capture the road wear that occurs either through negotiations with those whose activities invite many cars to the town, which cars do not register at the town. In other words, they're not garaged here legally, or by some other method where we can capture I think there are probably 12 to 13,000 parking permits granted by the university every year. Many of those vehicles are undergraduate students' cars, live in the dorms, park their cars on campus, and do not register them here. We may not want them to be registered here, just for our own automobile insurance concerns, but is there some way to capture or to get some funding for this enormous amount of wear that takes place on our roads, where we don't get compensation from the excise tax that would ordinarily happen except for the extraordinary nature of the large businesses in our town.
Mr. Masanti?
I don't have a count on the number of communities who issue property tax funded debt for road work, but I suspect it's a fair number. The fact that the town of Amherst over the last 4 years or so has chosen, now totaling 1/3 of our debt service, to be related to road improvements, I think the reasons for that are obvious to all of you as to its need. We have used water and sewer funds at times for portions of road improvement work when there's related water and sewer work on infrastructure that has contributed to the road being disrupted. Yeah, there is a way to pay for this that would get us substantial money, and I would encourage you to be in touch with Governor Patrick and ask him to join the legislature, House and Senate, who have voted unanimously or near unanimously multiple times now over the last year and a half to allocate the increased gas tax that was voted by the legislature and supported by many of us in municipal government. That 3-cent increase to the gas tax, PVTA, you're seeing service improvements that will be implemented all over the PVTA region, including Amherst, this September, funded by, in substantial ways, by the increase in the gas tax. A portion of that gas tax increase was intended to also be reinvested locally back to the cities and towns for road work. We were looking at as much as a 50% increase in support from the state, an amount that's over $400,000 increase to the town. That's nearly as much as we spend annually on roads in Amherst. So there is a way, we're hoping with the current governor or whoever becomes governor next January, that they release the money that the legislature has authorized so we can get to the task of substantially increasing our rate of fixing the town's road. There is a mechanism. It's already been voted by the legislature.
Is there further discussion on debt service before we come to a vote? I see a hand, second row right there.
Ellie Manir Gotti, Precinct 8. I was just wondering what trees Part 2 means.
I didn't understand that, so possibly this didn't need. Could you just repeat that, please?
Trees Part 2.
I'll resist the urge to say something cute there. You know that a couple of years ago now, town meeting authorized $600,000 for planting of public shade trees across the town. The town has, we're well into that project now under the great work of the DPW and Alan Snow leading that effort. The town has borrowed money incrementally against that $600,000 based on the pace of the work each season. So Part 2 means it was a second round of borrowing against that $600,000 related to the tree planting.
Further discussion? I see no hands. We are now coming to a vote on the motion before you, a majority vote. All those in favor of the motion before you, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say no. I hear unanimous vote in favor. We move on to Public Works, and I call on Ms. Ratner to make a motion.
Thank you. I move that the Okay. I move that the town raise and appropriate $2,076,997 for public works.
I hear a second. You may speak to your motion.
Thank you. The Public Works Department consists of several divisions: Public Works Administration, Highway, Snow and Ice Removal, Street and Traffic Lights, Equipment Maintenance, and Tree and Grounds Maintenance. The Tree and Grounds Maintenance Division maintains the town's cemeteries, trees, parks and commons, and the downtown area. In addition to administering these divisions, the Public Works Administration also oversees the activities and budgets of the Water, Sewer, and Solid Waste Enterprise Funds. There are a total of 63 full-time employees in the Public Works Department, Water, Sewer, and Solid Waste Funds combined. Funds for utilities and maintenance of the Public Works facility are included in this budget. The budget for the Highway Division is increasing by $45,691, or 7.5%, due to the collective bargaining settlement and reduced reliance on project funding for staffing. Road maintenance supplies are included in this budget. The snow and ice removal budget does not increase for FY15. In the current fiscal year, FY14, there have been 32 snowstorms with a total accumulation of 46.4 inches of snow. The operating budget has been overspent by $86,000 and the overtime budget by $59,000. So this is a reason that we need to have reserves to cover these kinds of expenses. I guess the good news is that we use less sand, and this was a factoid I received today from the superintendent of Public Works, and he said that we didn't use sand and that the sweeping is going faster than he thought. So that's the good news. The street and traffic lights budget includes funding for electricity and maintenance for street lights and traffic lights. There are no personnel costs associated with this budget. The Public Works Department maintenance divisions provide maintenance for most of the outdoor facilities of the town, including athletic fields at the schools and 8 buildings. A crew of 3 maintains approximately 81 vehicles used for road maintenance, snow plowing, tree care, park maintenance, leaf pickup, water, and sewer. The enterprise funds reimburse the general fund for services provided. The number of full-time equivalent employees in this functional area remains unchanged at 26.86. Service levels remain the same as FY14. The $56,870, or 2.8% increase in the budget amount for FY15 is due mostly to the employee collective bargaining settlement. The Finance Committee recommends this budget by a vote of 6-0, unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. Select Board, you have a statement or just going by your written statement? Just going by the written statement. This is a majority vote. The motion is on the screen before you. The Public Works section of the Finance Committee booklet is on page 28. And I will quickly go through the line items. Are there questions on Public Works administration or discussion? I see no hands. On highway, I see no hands. On snow and ice removal, I'm sorry, third row from the back, right there in the purple. Wait for your microphone, please.
Joan Burgess, Precinct 9. I have a question about sidewalks. I don't notice...
Good. Hold the microphone right up to your lips.
Okay.
There you go.
I have a question about sidewalks. I don't see a line item in this budget for sidewalks, while I did see one under the debt service thing. Where do sidewalks fall?
Okay. Mr. Mooring, you want to step forward, introduce yourself, and talk about sidewalks?
Good evening. Guilford Mooring, Superintendent of Public Works. Sidewalks used to be its own section of the budget, but it was combined with the highway budget because the highway department handles all the sidewalks. So it's lumped in with all the other highway stuff now. There is a capital item that we request every year, and you'll see that in the capital items that we ask for $30,000 to do repairs of sidewalks with that. So that's where the sidewalks are.
Thank you. Any more discussion on highway or snow and ice removal? And we're moving on to street and traffic lights. Yes, right down in the front, please.
We switched out all the traffic lights to high-efficient, energy-efficient LEDs, right? So when are we going to see electricity savings? I thought they were 50% more efficient or something. Looks like the last few years has been the exact same. Shouldn't it go down?
Mr. Pooler?
It did go down in the FY14 budget. Mr. Mooring gave us estimates when we put together the FY14 budget, and based on the known efficiencies for the street lights that we put in, and because we had efficiencies there, we were able to move money from that section of the budget to the highway section in FY14 so that we could reduce our reliance on project funding in the DPW budget. So Mr. Mooring was prescient and made a good recommendation for the FY14 budget.
And yes, right in the center there.
Claire Bertrand, Precinct 8. I also just want to rise in appreciation of the upgrade to the LED streetlights around town. I'm glad to hear there's savings, but I also want to inform you that I feel like our town is safer. I think it's a better light, it's brighter, and driving around with kids at night, I just feel safer. So thank you.
Further discussion on street and traffic lights or on equipment maintenance? Any discussion on tree and grounds maintenance? Are we ready to come to a vote? It looks like we are. We will now come to a vote on the motion that's before you, raise and appropriate $2,076,997 for public works. This is a majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say no. The ayes have it unanimously. We now move on to the water fund, and I call on Mr. Slaughter for a motion.
I move that the town appropriate $3,801,288 for the water fund, and that to meet such appropriation, $3,801,288 be made available from the water fund revenues of the current year.
Do I hear a second? I do. You may speak to your motion.
I'll do a brief introduction for those that are new to town meeting regarding the enterprise funds, which this is one of, and the following three will be as well. These are funds that operate and are funded by user fees, and so we try to set the user fees to fund the activities of those various functions within the town. In the water fund specifically, it's, as it says in the Finance Committee book on page 30, that's the part of our government that gets the water to our houses that we can drink and use for bathing and everything else. The water rate will increase this year a little bit in order to maintain the fund balance. That fund also, one of the other things about enterprise funds is they do carry and pay for their debt service. So any of the projects that we do within those funds that require a borrowing are paid for out of the revenues that are generated from the fees that you pay when you pay your water bill, sewer bill, et cetera. The Finance Committee voted 6-0 to recommend this to you. One other item about the water fund is that it does have this year a payment of $150,000 towards the OPEB obligation for the employees within the water fund. So we're beginning in this fund and subsequently in the sewer fund to fund the OPEB liability for the workers contained within this section of the budget.
Thank you. Does the Select Board have a statement to make on this? Ms. Kruger?
Select Board recommends the article or the water fund amount, and there is no comment beyond what you just heard from the Finance Committee.
Thank you. This is a majority vote, and the water fund section of the Finance Committee booklet is on page 30. And I'm not going to go through line items in this one. I'm just opening it up to general discussion. Anybody have any questions or discussion on the water fund before we come to a vote? Yes, right down there.
James Scott, Precinct 7. In terms of the water fund and anticipating the sewer fund as well, I was curious as to how the rates for Amherst compare to Northampton and other communities in the surrounding areas.
Anybody answer the comparative rate question? Mr. Masanti.
Yes, we do look at that each year as we review potential budgets and impacts on the rate. We also review a survey that's done by an engineering company of municipal water and sewer rates statewide, and we are well below the statewide averages, and we are below the water and sewer rates in our two neighbors to the west.
Thank you. Further discussion before we come to a vote on water fund? I see no hands. We will now come to a vote on the motion before you. This is a majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. All opposed, please say no. The ayes have it unanimously. We now move on to the sewer fund. Mr. Slaughter to make a motion.
I move that the town appropriate $3,803,569 for the sewer fund, and that to meet such appropriation, $3,803,569 be made available from sewer fund revenues of the current year.
I hear a second. I do. You may speak to your motion.
Much like the water fund, the sewer fund is funded through its user fees. The Finance Committee voted 6-0 to recommend this to you. Like the water fund, the sewer fund will also make a payment to the OPEB trust in order to cover its liability for its employees. Also, like the water fund, there will be a slight rate increase. And as Mr. Musanti said just a moment ago, our rates are below the regional averages and state averages for sewer rates. As you all know, in the Finance Committee book, we outline what the sewer fund does, which is sort of the opposite of what the water fund does, which is to take care of the waste that is produced by our community in the use of the water. Again, there's no significant changes to this budget, and the Finance Committee voted 6-0 to recommend it to you.
Thank you. Any comments from the Select Board on this? Ms. Kruger.
The Select Board recommends no comment.
Thank you. This is another majority vote, and the sewer fund is on page 31 of the Finance Committee booklet. And I will just open it up to general discussion before we come to a vote. Is there any discussion? Yes, right there.
Ruth Hazard, Precinct 3. I just wonder if you could clarify a couple items here. There's debt service, there's capital program, and there's indirect costs appropriated in the general fund. And I'm I'd like to understand better, if you could explain it, how that debt service relates to the debt service that we just voted on, and how that capital program relates to capital expenditures that I think we will be voting on, and what are the indirect costs?
Mr. Pooler or Mr. Slaughter, who wants to go for it? Mr. Pooler.
Not everybody at once. I'll go up from the indirect costs, just going from the bottom up, are the costs that the enterprise funds reimburse the general fund for the time and expenses incurred in the general fund for people who are paid there, like me, or like the treasurer collector, or the accounting office, to perform services that are related to these funds. So the treasurer's office sends out all the bills for the water and sewer fund, and we charge that to them. Then included within the budgets for the enterprise funds are line items for capital, and if you look at the manager's budget, it tells you exactly what those capital items are, both for the cash outlay, which you see there on the line under capital, and the debt service. The individual budgets in the manager's budget show what those projects are for. And so when you're voting for these budgets, you're voting for the debt service that's related to the projects that are listed here, as opposed to the other ones you just voted for the non-enterprise fund. So all the sewer costs are within the fund, all the water costs are within this fund.
Thank you. Is there further discussion before we come to a vote? I see a hand back there.
Pat Church, Precinct 5. I just want to, I see that the sewer rate, the water rate also, but the sewer rate is going up 4.2%. The water rate was less. But I feel as though increasing the rate on something like water should be not easily done. I feel like it should be more of a last resort, because these are fees that impact the poor much more differently than people who have plenty of money. I work with people who don't go to the doctor because there's a $10 copay. When I'm a physical therapist, I go to their house and I hear these stories. And I just want to encourage the departments that have fees to give those fees and raise the money in ways that are at least as little going to hurt people who can't afford it as possible. Thank you.
Ms. Moran.
I just want to point out that the water and sewer funds are one of the biggest customers for those funds is the University of Massachusetts, and another is Amherst College. They don't pay property taxes, but they do pay water and sewer fees.
Thank you. Mr. Vasanti?
Yeah, I would just add, I can assure you that the water and sewer commissioners of the town, who are also the select board, very much have that on their minds each year when staff bring forward recommendations. And we have a track record over many years now of not needing to have a water and sewer rate increase each and every year. And I think this was one of those years where a small incremental increase was needed. And as I recollect from, I think it was in January we did all this, the impact on the average four-person household on their bill is like $1 a month. That was the impact. So we hear you on that one.
Mr. Steinberg.
Yeah, I just wanted, thank you. I just wanted to point out one additional thing as far as information. The rate increase was 2.8% in the rate of bills. The revenue increase was 4.2%, and one would think that they would be the same, but as the Finance Committee booklet explains in that section, because we were adding new customers, including you know, because we extended water lines into Pelham and in certain new areas, we were able to add new homes that had very much wanted to get into our sewer system, so that it was the addition of homes, but the increase was actually 2.8%.
Thank you. Further discussion before we come to a vote? Yes, right here.
Jim Perrott, Precinct 1. Usually when sewer lines or water lines are extended, the houses that they are passing pay something. And I was wondering, where is that reflected in this budget?
Mr. Mooring.
Turn the page accidentally. So when you look at the water and sewer funds, any connection fees, when we pass a house or when we're installing a water sewer line in town, we actually don't require you to connect until you're ready to connect. So if you have a viable well, if you have a viable septic system, you wait until you need to connect to connect. So there's no sewer betterment charge or water betterment charge, which is done in most communities or several communities around us. All you have to do is pay a sewer entrance fee, and that's shown in the actual fee structure, miscellaneous fees that we collect in the budget. So it's actually shown more in detailed in the actual budget book, the town manager's budget book, but it's under sewer fees, not under any abatements or betterment fees.
Thank you. Further discussion before we come to a vote? I see no hands. We will now come to a vote on the motion before you. This is a majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, please say no. The ayes have it unanimously. We now move on to the Solid Waste Fund. Mr. Slaughter.
I move that the town appropriate $491,133 for the Solid Waste Fund, and that to meet such appropriation, $476,530 be made available from Solid Waste Fund revenues of the current year, and $14,603 be transferred from Solid Waste Fund surplus.
Do I hear a second? I do. You may speak to your motion.
The Solid Waste Fund is one of the enterprise funds that has been struggling in recent years, primarily due to the fact that once we closed the what is now the transfer station, when it was formerly the landfill, we generated a lot more revenue when the landfill was open. Obviously, since it's closed and it's just a transfer station, it doesn't generate nearly the revenue that it did in the past. Over the last several years, the Recycling and Refuse Committee, in combination with town staff, have looked at various ways to try to generate more revenue for this fund, and it has been struggling to maintain its fund balance. As you see, this year we're taking $14,000 in change out of the balance in order to support the fund. You'll also notice that this fund doesn't support OPEB for its small number of employees. And the other thing you'll notice is that excuse me. If I was looking at the right page, no wonder I'm confused. Sorry. You'll notice the indirect costs are not billed back to this fund, again, because it doesn't have the revenue that is necessary in order to support those costs. Those costs are not large, but nonetheless, they're not zero. But we do not have the capability within this fund to pay the town for those services. There has been a general decrease in the amount of tonnage brought into the transfer station, and that has reduced revenues. And
we're in solid waste.
Yes.
Okay.
There is that's reduced the operating expenses of the transfer station, but it also reduces the revenues to have less trash and whatnot come in. So there is going to be a fee increase this year to help offset some of the revenue loss. Hopefully that will help to stabilize the balance a little bit. Later in town meeting, we'll be voting on a permission for the town manager to negotiate a long-term contract for a cell phone tower that actually would be placed at the transfer station, which would also potentially help the revenue for this fund. Again, the Finance Committee voted 6-0 to recommend this budget to you.
Thank you. Ms. Kruger for the Select Board?
Select Board recommends and no comment.
Thank you. This is a majority vote, and we are looking at page 32 of the Finance Committee book. And I'm not going to go through the line items here either. I'm just opening it up to general discussion. Is there any discussion on the Solid Waste Fund? Yes, right down here.
I'm just curious on the recycling. It's what kind of profit or loss?
I'm sorry, could you identify yourself, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. Phil Goslin, Precinct 1. I'm just curious on recycling, whether it's showing a profit or a loss, or what kind of, how the trend is going with that.
Mr. Mooring?
Unfortunately, this time it's a loss. Recycling for us is a bit costly because we have to take our material to the Springfield MRF. Our hauling costs are what eats up all the profit from the material we actually sell at the MRF. We are actively looking at changing that. We have talked to several people who actually were willing to buy our paper from us directly, so we may be doing that in the future and not taking it to the MRF. If we do that, we may have to cut off all ties with the MRF, so we'll have to figure out a place to take our bottles and cans, which we have an option, and actually it also may be cheaper than hauling all the material to the MRF. But right now, the overall recycling picture is we lose money when we recycle, but it's just a little bit of money right now.
Thank you. Further discussion on Solid Waste Fund? Yes, actually, this to my left of the aisle right there, yes.
Sigurd Nilsson, Precinct 8. As a source of revenue, has anyone investigated putting solar panels on that site and generating revenue that way?
Mr. Mooring.
You're talking about the new landfill or where the transfer station is, correct? It is, but the old landfill and maintenance of the old, well...
Let's not have a back and forth discussion. Call for the microphone if you need some clarification. So
the old landfill is in this fund too, and what is paid for out of the solid waste fund is the long-term maintenance of the old landfill. The new landfill, which is where the transfer station is, we also looked at putting a solar facility there. But what is the problem with the new landfill or the transfer station for a solar facility is it's actually below tree line. There's a lot of shadows and shading because the top of the landfill is probably a good 20 feet below the tree line. So you don't get as much exposure to the sun. You also have a very intricate and very innovative cap on the middle section of the landfill. It's a herringbone cap, we call it. So you have to have a minimum grade on top of the cap, and to meet the grade, we made little valleys and ridges where you wouldn't normally make valleys and ridges, so you get the proper drainage that's required by DEP. It's a very innovative cap, but what it does is it breaks up the surface for solar panels and makes it harder to install solar panels in the middle section of the new landfill. So we actually looked at putting them there, but everybody who looked at it said, no, we're not interested in putting them there.
Thank you. Further discussion on the Solid Waste Fund? Yes, right down here in the front.
Bob Greeny, Precinct 10. What's the reluctance to raising fees so that it covers the costs? It seems like, especially when it comes to solid waste, that we should be discouraging it, and raising the costs would discourage it. So why not just raise the fees so that it covers the costs?
Mr. Mooring.
Solid waste is an interesting, very interesting business. Yes, you want to raise the fees to a point to cover your expenses, and you want to raise your fees to discourage people from throwing things away and recycle more. There is a point where you raise the fees in solid waste where you get people who use the alternative disposal methods. The alternative disposal methods are the trash cans in the center of town. Almost probably 50% of the trash that the parks crew picks up out of the trash in the center of town is a bag of trash from the apartment complexes or from people who work in the downtown who just drop their trash off in a public trash can for free. That's one thing that happens. We do have, and every once in a while when we have a rate increase, we'll see an uptick in dumping on the side of the road, and we get more calls for that. Every piece of trash, furniture, TV, computer monitor, that's picked up on the side of the road comes out of the highway fund. There's not really a big budget for trash in the highway fund, so that cuts into pothole patching money or line painting money or other types of things. So you do walk a very fine line with trash. You have to have a rate which encourages people to use your facility and encourage recycling, but you don't want to make it too high that you encourage the alternative disposal sites.
Further discussion? Yes, right there.
James Scott, Precinct 7. I was just curious in terms of contributors to the solid waste stream. Is the University of Massachusetts a participant in this to our solid waste disposal? Is Amherst College? Does all of the Amherst municipal solid waste go to the solid waste and other big users?
Mr. Mooring?
No, no, and yes. I've been waiting to do that all night. UMass and Amherst College have their own trash disposal system, so that they don't come to our facility. All the municipal trash, with the exception of a few buildings, come to the transfer station and come through this fund. The schools, our solid waste fund does collection at all the schools. We do recycling collection at all the schools, and we support the composting program at all the schools except for Crocker Farm has their own facility, I believe. And one of the other schools is using another method for composting right now.
Thank you. Is there further discussion before we come to a vote? I see no hands. We will now come to a vote on the motion before you for the Solid Waste Fund. This is a majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. All opposed, please say no. I hear unanimous vote. Passes unanimously. We now move on to the Transportation Fund. I call on Mr. Slaughter.
I move that the town appropriate $716,717 for the Transportation Fund, and that to meet such appropriation, $716,717 be made available from the Transportation Fund revenues of the current year.
Do I hear a second? I do. You may speak to your motion.
The Finance Committee voted 6-0 to recommend this budget to you. If you've looked at the Finance Committee report, it looks as though it's a 4% decrease in this budget. That's actually more of an accounting artifact than it is an actual change in the budget. The budget itself did not change very much from fiscal 14 to fiscal 15. However, the rules that the state imposes on us regarding how we account for certain income and expenses of this fund have changed, and so it's changed the amounts somewhat considerably. Nonetheless, the Transportation Fund involves our assessment for PVTA, our parking meters and parking lots, and the maintenance of those, and the parking garage. Again, very little change in this budget in a real sense of income and expense, more of an accounting change this year. Again, the Finance Committee voted 6-0 to recommend this to you.
Thank you. For the Select Board, Ms. Kruger?
Yes. Can you guess? We recommended this one too, and for the reasons stated by the previous. The Select Board recommended this amount, and for the reasons stated by the previous speaker, so we have no additional comments.
Thank you. This is a majority vote. We can see the Transportation Fund on page 33 of the Finance Committee booklet. And again, I'm just going to open it up to general discussion right away. Is there any discussion on Transportation Fund before we come to a vote? Okay. Just checking to see what other hands I see. You don't need to point. I sometimes will see a hand, but then look around to see if there's another hand before selecting somebody, so hang in there. But yes.
Thank you for the moderator, Rob Kustner, Precinct 3. Thank you for the special attention. The town manager also has the enviable role now of being the chair of the PVTA Advisory Board, and I know there's some interesting and significant changes to the transit funding itself within the transportation fund. I'm wondering if you could just quickly perhaps summarize the financial aspects of that. I don't think we need the route details, but if you could, please, if you're willing to just let the town meeting know how the changes to some of the bus system will affect us financially.
Mr. Masanti.
Thank you. Yes, the PVTA and its advisory board, upon which I sit, will be considering specific recommendations for route changes at our May 28th meeting to be implemented in really 3 phases, summer, September, and next December. The impact financially on the member towns of the PVTA, we're one of 23, is nominal because the increased funding needed to implement the enhancements and other changes are almost entirely funded by the increase to the state gas tax that I mentioned earlier. Our member assessments are capped under Prop 2.5, like the property taxes are. The cumulative assessment from the PVTA can only go up by a total of 2.5%, and then the individual member towns increases plus or minus for that from that based on the number of service miles in the community. So that's why you don't see much of a change in the appropriation you're being asked to vote. I can tell you on the service adjustments, there'll be more frequent north-south service on 116, including in the summertime down to Atkins Corner, new express service to Holyoke, and a revised route serving what was the Amity shuttle and up into North Amherst that will have more frequent service up into North Amherst. And yes, there will be a bus stop right in front of the Survival Center based upon the amendment I will offer and get passed on May 28th.
Thank you. Further discussion on the Transportation Fund? I see no hands. We will come to a vote on the motion before you. Again, this is a majority vote. All those in favor of the motion before you on the Transportation Fund, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, please say no. Moderator hears a unanimous vote. We now move on to the public safety section of the budget. I call on Ms. Moran for a motion.
I move that the town appropriate $9,596,952 for public safety, and that to meet such appropriation, $7,212,392 be raised by taxation, and $2,384,560 be transferred from the ambulance receipts reserved for appropriation account.
Do I hear a second? I do. You may speak to your motion.
This budget increases by 4.7% from the FY14 budget due to collective bargaining settlements reached in 2013. For this money, we get around-the-clock police, fire, ambulance, emergency dispatch, and animal welfare services provided by 107.5 full-time employees, a number unchanged from FY14. The sources of funds and more details are on pages 34 and 35 in the Finance Committee report. Operating costs for the police department are the same as last year, as is the authorized number of tax-funded officers, 45. That's 5 fewer than we had 7 years ago. There are also 2 full-time and 1 half-time support staff. This year, FY14, we had an additional grant-funded officer who was assigned full-time to domestic violence cases, but grant funding for that position will end. Also ending is the grant that had paid for a crime data analyst. Police have increased efforts to be proactive about problems in neighborhoods, but that is good, but that takes a lot of time, officers' time. The fire department's operating costs are level funded. The authorized number of full-time firefighters is 46, plus 1 support staff, the same as in FY14 and 1 more than in FY13. Total staffing is low relative to national norms. The department now has a philosophy of ensuring that at least 8 firefighters are on duty at all times during the academic year. Without adding positions, that means there will be higher overtime costs to be paid out of the ambulance fund. The University of Massachusetts will again contribute money to bring the number of on-duty ambulances up from 3 to 5 on busy fall and spring weekends, which has worked out well this year. The Communications Center budget increases by 2.6% and maintains the status quo. As in FY14, there will be 12 dispatcher positions, one of them entirely funded by a state grant. Depending on completion of the updated regional dispatch study for the towns of Amherst, Pelham, and Hadley, for which we're still waiting, I believe, this budget may need to be amended at a future town meeting. The police facility and animal welfare budgets remain virtually unchanged. Each of these departments has 1 employee, and both of them are indispensable.
Thank you. Mr. Wald for the Select Board.
On March 31st, the Select Board voted unanimously to support the recommendation for these funds, and we made no formal statement, but of course we are very grateful for the work of this indispensable staff.
Thank you. This is a majority vote required, and the public safety portion of the budget you can see on page 34 in the Finance Committee book. And I am going to go through this by line items. So is there any discussion on police facility? I see no hands. Any discussion on police? Yes, way in the back there. Yep, that's you.
Siobhan Best, Precinct 9. I think this is where I ask. I just had a question. It just was stated that there was a certain number of police people, and so to cover the need, overtime was required. And I'm wondering if it has been kind of calculated about, you know, the number of hours overtime, if it's an hourly wage thing, and as opposed to maybe hiring 1 or 2 other full-time or even part-time officers, and if that kind of comparison has been made.
Do we have anybody who wants to speak to police staffing and budgeting? Mr. Musanti.
Yes, we do look at that relationship fairly regularly as we evaluate authorized strength needed for the police. We're fortunate to have a strong and ever-improving working relationship with the UMass Police Department, and there's some joint patrol work that goes on, and assignment of personnel on peak weekends and things like that. We also, depending upon the time of year and need, we request and receive assistance from the Massachusetts State Police, as was the case this past weekend. Our current thinking is that the cost benefit doesn't work when you look at the overall cost of adding a additional staff person with benefits, et cetera, and the life cycle cost of that position. It doesn't work in relationship to the overtime, but there's no question that the men and women of our police department are working awfully hard, and the long hours are something we do pay attention to, and we worry about their overall workload.
More discussion on police. Yes, right there in the center, third row.
John Hornick, Precinct 7. It was stated that 2 grant-funded positions, one for domestic violence and the other for criminal data analysis, are disappearing because the grants are ending. I was wondering in what way the department continues to support those functions, or do they just disappear with the grant?
Anybody want to answer that question? I see we have a gentleman coming up from the back who can answer that question. Thank you. Please identify yourself.
Scott Livingstone, Police Chief. The 2 grant-funded positions, the domestic violence advocate investigation person ends in January of 2015. So that position will probably, the remainder of that position will have to probably take funds from the operating budget somewhere. The crime analysis position will be ending in the fall of this year, and unless funds become available, that position will not be filled.
Thank you. Further discussion on police before we move on? Yes, way over there. You, yes.
Richard Morris, Precinct 7. I guess I addressed this to the chief. I was curious as to the frequency of domestic violence calls. What's the trend line on that? And if you could describe, as I understand it, you need 2 officers for each one of those calls. And so what sort of a situation does that create when officers are responding to those calls as far as the rest of the town, the rest of the staffing for any other calls or domestic violence or otherwise? I just asking if you could just sort of describe what the staffing situation is when you get those calls.
Chief Livingstone?
Sure. There are a number of calls, types of calls that necessitate 2-officer response, and those are increasing. Unfortunately, the number of domestic violence calls that we receive in this town is increasing as well. Once the officers respond to a specific domestic violence call, they'll make a determination of what to do, whether it's an arrest made, what have you, the assistance, whatever the assistance is needed for those people that are involved. The domestic violence investigator that is paid for the grant handles all the investigation after that. So she's very specific to assisting the victims, working with our civilian advocates, the Every Woman Center, courthouse personnel, whatever needs for follow-up. That is the responsibility of that grant-funded position. But the officers that respond, it's increasing. The number of calls for domestic violence are increasing. It's a requirement of a 2-officer response. So, quite frankly, on some shifts, there are only 3 officers assigned to patrol. So, as long as they're tied up at those calls, the rest of the town for that time period is uncovered.
Any more discussion on police before we move on? Yes, right there, front row.
Yes, John Fox, Precinct 10. The question is for you, Chief. Could you elaborate on the collaboration with the university, please? Give us a sense of the trend line. Are we increasing the collaboration? How many cars? How many people? Can we look forward to some increase over some time? It seems to work very well when we do it.
Before I recognize the chief to answer, I just want to remind people that you actually don't direct questions to specific people. You direct your questions to the moderator, and if somebody chooses to answer them, they will. And having said that, Chief Livingstone, would you like to respond?
Sure. The mutual patrols that we do are usually scheduled the weekends of September, October, April, and May, and usually on Friday and Saturday nights between the hours of about 10 to 2 in the morning. And when we can do those, they work very well. The officers that are assigned from the Amherst Police Department for those mutual patrols are all done on overtime. So if we can't find officers to work those, sometimes they don't go. Sometimes we don't have the officers available to work them. And same with the University Police Department, because both agencies are very busy at those times of the evening on the weekends at the same time. So the university has a host of issues going on campus. And of course, we're pretty busy at that hour as well. So when we're able to accomplish having officers from both departments assigned to those neighborhoods, it works very well. It doesn't happen every weekend when we assign them or schedule them, but for most weekends they do. So.
Thanks. I'm going to move on to the fire EMS, and after we go through the line items, if there's more questions on police, people will be free to ask them. But I want to move on to the next line item now. So is there any discussion on fire EMS? I see no hands. Is there any discussion on communication center? Yes, back there. Okay, well, you can go ahead and talk about that.
Vince O'Connor, Precinct 1. And Mr. Moderator, the question is for both regarding both the police and fire departments. And for each department, I'm interested in how the leadership group in the department, the chiefs and their senior staff, evaluate the activities of their department and make recommendations both to regional and town organizations in a preventative mode. In other words, what social service activities might actually reduce the police, response requirements, what social service activities might reduce the fire department response activities, the kind of educational work that might be done with regard to fire safety in the elementary schools. I know we don't have a police athletic league. The question would occur whether there is some organized police activity with regard to Big Brothers Big Sisters or some other similar organization. Because my thought is that really, with respect to especially the police department, I think looking at prevention, whether it's raising the minimum wage so that families are not so stressed or other activities, I think prevention is important, and social service organizations are key to a lot of the prevention activities. So those are the questions, Mr. Moderator. If there's someone willing to answer, I'd be happy to hear it.
If Chief Livingstone or somebody else is interested in responding, I will recognize them. But I just want to make a brief comment from the moderator, which is that a response to that question would probably be at least an 8-hour seminar. So, so just to understand that, it goes a little beyond what we can discuss on the floor of town meeting in any level of detail. But having said that, I will let you respond.
Timmy, you want to come down and respond for fire? I can tell you that we call it community outreach, is a very important aspect of my police department since I became the chief. We have liaisons to a number of committees and groups in town, whether it's the homeless shelter, the domestic violence folks up at the Every Woman Center at UMass, just about all the schools. We have officer liaisons that works directly with the schools, whether it be the elementary schools, the high school. And I know I'm going to miss a bunch of people, and the moderator's correct. We could go on hours for discussion of this. But it's just an integral part of what the police department does. Our community-based policing, our problem-solving policing, our sector-based policing. Officers are all very responsible for reaching out to all those specific networks, whether it's the UMass administration and all the meetings we have with the community campus coalitions, on and on. I'd be more than happy to answer specific questions, though, when we have more time.
Thank you. And would you like to be recognized? Why don't you identify yourself to the group?
I'm taller. Tim Nelson, Fire Chief. Answer to your question, where do I start? We, as most folks know, we have our Safe program in the elementary schools. That's been going on for at least 20 years, And that has now morphed into a senior safe program, which is using the school-based as the model. We also have liaisons be with all three colleges, and their student EMS services. We reach out to the schools, all the frats, sororities, and we work with them on fire safety on a year-round basis.
Thank you. Any more discussion on fire EMS? Yes. Okay. Good. Communication.
Milkar Shabazz, ex officio from the school committee. The previous meeting, Mr. Moderator, we had a discussion of kind of an incident that involved a school, a lockdown, and there was a situation where the police moving in response to that, went in terms of house-to-house kinds of searching. And the police chief noted that, in my asking, that it was a matter of communication was the issue there. So I'm wondering if in the communication center, this appropriation, if this may be something that will have a bearing on that and help improve that, because we had, as of last night's meeting, in public comment, a person spoke to being one of those who was investigated in that house-to-house kind of searching that all turned out to be unnecessary. So if there was something that could be understood about how this communication center appropriation might help to mitigate those kinds of things from happening in the community. Thank you.
Chief Livingstone?
Sure, I spoke to that individual today to try and clarify that, but that was certainly, there was a breakdown of communication from employees of the school to the police officers that had responded to that call. So, you know, that's certainly part of the after-action report that we do. We do after-action reports for just about any major incident that we respond to. So I can tell you that the area that needed to be corrected was a specific communication between the school and our police department. So I believe we're going to not have issues like that again.
Any other discussion on communication center line item? How about on animal welfare? Any more discussion at all on public safety before we come to a vote? Yes, right there in the black. Yes.
Jane Wald, Precinct 1. In the public safety report, I note that the police department is understaffed. The report states that there aren't enough police officers to cover all sectors of town. Also, the loss of grant funds directed specifically toward domestic violence. So I see the reductions in the budget. I'm wondering if there is a longer-term plan to restore those services or to restore the funds that can support them.
Mr. Masanti.
Thank you for the question. And long-term strategies on staffing for all of our public safety functions is front and center as part of a townwide staffing analysis that is mostly complete that I will be presenting to the select board later this spring. And you know, police staffing is certainly a part of that. I did recommend in my budget proposal that I presented to the Select Board and Finance Committee back in January that we remain optimistic, for example, on implementing regional public safety dispatch a different configuration of towns, but we think we'll have analysis completed by early summer that it's quite possible we'll realize some financial savings. I made a recommendation in January that we take a portion of those savings and add a downtown walking beat officer, for example, which begins to get at that issue. But long term, looking at resources for police and public safety staffing is a challenge and is a real issue that we'll be grappling with, and you might see that in future recommendations.
Further discussion before we come to a vote? Yes, the 1, 2, 3, 4th or 5th row back, right in the middle there. Yep, you.
Tracy Lane Boutillier, Precinct 6. I have a question, and moderator, you did say this would probably take a seminar to answer this fully. But my question is back on an earlier statement about domestic violence and how that has dramatically increased within the town, and relating that to the data, the crime data analyst that we have that will be losing that position if the funding is not continued for that. Will there be information or time that the public can receive a report on that information that that position is the person in that position is compiling, or do you have information now currently to indicate what is increasing the pattern of the domestic violence rising in our town?
Chief Livingstone?
I'm not sure if I used the word dramatic increases, but certainly increases in the number of domestic violence calls that we're both responding to and investigating. Some of it could be the fact that we've got a civilian liaison that works with the university and our police department, and Northampton Police Department, the University of Mass Police Departments. So I think there's more awareness and knowledge. So I don't know if there's more domestic violence going on or if there's just more being reported and people are more willing to come forward and report it to us. Part of what our crime analyst does is a lot of that. She'll try and figure out areas of concern and why it's happening in specific areas, and we'll work with her to do prevention. And she does that with a lot of things, traffic accidents, burglaries and break-ins and stuff. So she's not just specifically looking at one area. Yeah, when that position, when that grant ends, you know, it's going to have to, the information that we get from her will just have to be picking up for the slack from some of my administrative officers. So.
Thank you. And I feel like maybe we're ready to come to a vote. Oh, I see a hand here.
Phil Jackson, Precinct 10. I just want to make one comment on it before we close it out, which is the staffing of these two departments is lower than it was almost a decade ago. The size of the town is growing. It continues to grow. The number of people in town gets larger. This is one of those budget areas where we get distracted by what was previously referred to as the 7-month economy. Obviously, things like Blarney Blowout and Hobart Lane and warm weekends and all of that create the impression that all these guys do is run around and deal with students who've had a little too much to drink. I invite you to go out and look at the crime statistics on the Amherst Police Department's website, so they have to report FBI crime statistics. And if you look at the nature of crime in this town today, I think you'd be absolutely boggled by what they're dealing with. So it's not just domestic violence, it's crimes that require a significant level of follow-up and investigation. Appreciating just when they're dealing with the students how long someone is out of commission when they make an arrest and the implications of having somebody out of commission. So this town is constantly not being protected because we don't have enough bodies to protect everybody. And the protection begins with the people that they're serving. So if they're stepping into a situation where there is domestic violence, it's protecting those people. It's being able to protect other people in town who may need them for some reason because of an accident or something else. And then it's also protecting themselves. And if anybody's watched any of the video of what the situations are that these guys walk into, these are the only town staff that are providing services where their life and other people's lives are at jeopardy. So we keep kicking the can down the road because the implications of these staff and their benefits and OPEBs and all that make it prohibitive. And you can't just throw overtime dollars and ask people who already work 50, 60 hours a week to work more. Not only because it's kind of inhumane, but it's also when you get tired, you make mistakes. So I think we just keep kicking this can down the road, and sooner or later we're going to have to address it and figure out how to give these guys at least some of the resources that they once had to try to serve a town that's bigger, more complex, and less safe in many respects than it was 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. Thanks.
Are we ready to come to a vote? I see no hands. We will now come to a vote on the motion before you for public safety. This is a majority vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, please say no. The ayes have it. Thank you, gentlemen. We now are skipping elementary schools and regional schools and moving on to library services. So we're going to play a little musical chairs, and the Finance Committee is going to leave their table, and the library trustees and directors are going to replace them at the front table. Oh, is it the Select Board? Oh, I'm sorry, the Select Board and Town Manager leave. Finance Committee gets to stay. We are now moving on to the library services portion of the budget, and I'm actually first calling on Sharon Shary, the library director, for her report. I think you want to make a report now, right? Yes. Yes, you first. We're going to hear a report, then we'll hear the motion under the article.
Hey, everybody. The Jones Library System.
You should just identify yourself even though.
I'm sorry, Sharon Shary, the library director. The Jones Library System serves over 300,000 patrons per year. On average, 900 patrons walk through our doors daily. Out of the almost 38,000 Amherst residents, over 20,000 of them have active library cards. The Jones Library System owns almost 240,000 items, and we circulate over 500,000 of those items per year. We circulate more than the other 6 Western Mass libraries, such as Northampton and Agawam, within our population group. When comparing the Jones Library to all libraries across the state within our population group, only 7 libraries, such as Lexington and Wellesley, circulate more heavily than the Jones, and they're all located in the Boston area. When we compare the Jones with all libraries across the state, regardless of population, only 17 libraries, such as Newton and Cambridge, circulate more than the Jones, and each of those, with the exception of Worcester, is in the Boston area. Our program attendance figures have increased exponentially. The number of youth programs over the past 5 years have remained relatively consistent. It's rare to come to the Jones Library on any given day and not be able to attend a wonderful youth program. But because we now have a staff member to oversee young adult programs and one to oversee adult programs, we are now truly able to do a great job of providing various quality programs for every member of our community. So why is any of this important? I like to use these numbers to help illustrate exactly how well used the Jones Library system is. Your tax dollars are being put to very good use. So let's talk dollars. The trustees are working hard to increase revenues and decrease the amount of money we draw annually from the endowment. And I was going to focus on some of the highlights from the budget, the library's budget summary found on page 52 of the Finance Committee's report. Starting with the personnel, there's a 3.1% increase. No new staff, it just covers steps and COLAs. Circulating materials shows a 3.1% increase. When the town appropriation goes up, so too does the amount of money we have to spend on circulating materials. And we're looking to have to spend about $200,000 on books for our next fiscal year. Down below, under sources of funds, you'll see our request for 2.7% increase in the town appropriation. The Board of Trustees is adhering to the town's FY15 budget request guidelines. The amount of state aid that we expect to spend next year is about the same as this fiscal year. And we use state aid money only to cover salaries that the town appropriation does not. Next down, you'll see the endowment draw rate, which we are dropping down to 4.5% for FY15. This is a cut of just over $43,000, or 11%. We already took a $40,000 cut for this fiscal year, and there will be another $40,000 cut for FY16 when we drop the rate down to 4%. Down to the annual fund drive, this fiscal year we've raised almost $60,000. We still have 2 months left to go, so we hope that this amount will increase slightly. Last year we raised $51,000. Under reserves and gifts, this is where we'll be relying more heavily as our endowment draw continues to drop. And we're continuing to increase our fundraising activities to help fill in the gaps. For example, we've mailed out 2 appeal letters last calendar year, and we will continue to do this year after year. We're starting to sell merchandise featuring our new logo, Sammy the Owl. The Friends group has been working on rejuvenating their fundraising efforts. They have a new logo, and they're selling new merchandise. And then there was our Sammy's event, which was just held on April 10th at the Yiddish Book Center. This will be an annual literary awards ceremony. And this year we honored Norton Juster and the owners of Amherst Books. Through underwriting, advertising sales, and ticket prices, we raised over $15,000 from this event. So that's really it for our operating budget. I feel very strongly that the staff of the Jones is very special. They understand the importance of excellent customer service. So we're not proposing any new big programs or services for next year. Instead, our goal is to just keep doing what we do, and always with your needs in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Ms. Ratner to make a motion for library services.
Thank you.
I move that the town approve the library services operating budget of $2,369,592, and that the town raise and appropriate $1,788,533 as its share of that budget.
Do I hear a second? You may speak to your motion.
Thank you. Library services are provided at the Jones Library, the North Amherst Library, and the Munson Memorial Library in South Amherst. The Jones Library building is owned by the Jones Library Incorporated, which is governed by the Jones Library trustees. The town owns the North Amherst and Munson Library buildings, and most maintenance expenses for these buildings are found in the town's facilities, maintenance, and public works budgets. The library budget has several sources of funding. And Doug, I have an overhead. Approximately 75% of support for this budget comes from the town appropriation. Okay, so that's the blue section. This appropriation increases 2.7% this year to $1,788,533. The Jones Library Endowment will be contributing $329,656 for FY15, a decrease of 11.6% from last year. And that's in the red. The endowment investment managers advise a spending rate of 4% from the endowment. This contribution uses 4.5%. Library state aid is budgeted at $40,000, the same as the FY14 budgeted amount, and that's in the green. To receive state aid, there are several minimum requirements for towns and libraries. Municipalities must fund their libraries at certain levels based on formulas. Libraries must spend a certain percentage of their budgets on materials, and libraries must be open a certain number of hours. Amherst libraries meet all of the necessary requirements. Other sources of funding are the Jones Library Annual Fund, the Friends of the Jones Libraries, and other gift funds. Contributions from all of these funds are expected to increase to support the FY15 budget, and that is the turquoise and purple sections. The number of full-time equivalent employees in the FY15 budget is 26.9, unchanged from FY14. The number of non-benefited part-time employees is expected to increase from 27 to 31 for FY15. So, the Finance Committee recommends this budget by a vote of 6-0 unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on the President of the Library Trustees to make a statement.
My name is Austin Serrett. I'm President of the Jones Library Board of Trustees. I want to say that the Board of Trustees has worked very hard in crafting this budget. We're very pleased with the cooperation that we've had through the planning committees with the town, and we think that the budget is lean but adequate. I want to highlight two things that you've already heard. One is the reduction of the endowment draw rate. We're trying to compensate that through more active and engaged fundraising, which Sharon Cherry just mentioned one particularly important event, the Sammys, but that's part of a long-range strategy that the board is developing to try to compensate for the reduction in the draw rate. Just two other things to say. I think it is fair to say that the Jones Library Board of Trustees works very cooperatively. Where we disagree, we have found ways of disagreeing in a spirit of cooperation, and that work, I think, will go on. And lastly, I want to emphasize what Sharon mentioned, and that is the excellence and dedication of the library staff. In particular, while people in town meeting may disagree about this or that aspect of the operation of the library or aspirations, I think there's one thing everybody in this room can agree on, and that is in Sharon Cherry, the director of the Amherst Library, we have a real gem, and she paid me to say that.
Thank you. Mr. Wall, do you have a statement for the Select Board? You may come forward.
The Select Board on March 31st voted 4-0 with one absent to recommend this budget. And we have no formal statement, but agreed that the library itself is a gem of the town, too. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a majority vote. Can we get the motion back up on the screen, please? In the Finance Committee booklet, we are on page 52 for library services. And I'm not going to go through the line items. I'm just going to open it up. Is there discussion before we come to a vote? Yes, right here in the third row.
Chris Riddle, Precinct 2. Does the draw rate exceed, or is it more or less than the income from the endowment?
Somebody on the... Robert? You may answer that.
That will vary from year to year.
Please identify yourself.
Okay. Roberts Pan, trustee and treasurer. That will vary from year to year. As in the most recent year, we did substantially better than that, which was very helpful because
try and speak into the microphone too.
Okay.
Thanks.
That was very helpful this year because over the past 5 years, as you know, the endowment took a big hit in 2008 and 9. The way in which the draws are calculated is based on the 12 quarters in the past. And so we are now finally getting past the impact of all of that, and that will now allow us to go forward. But in order for us to get back to where we were 2 years ago in terms of a draw at the 4% rate, we would need to add over $2 million more to our endowment.
Thank you. Yes, right there on the aisle.
Hilda Greenbaum, Precinct 1. How much is the endowment as of the most recent accounting? Say the end of the first quarter.
Mr. Pan.
Yes, it is something over $7.7 million.
Is there further discussion? Yes, all the way in the back there.
Siobhan Best, Precinct 9. Mr. Moderator, I love the Jones Library. I grew up going to the Jones Library. I grew up in that children's section. And I noticed that the two things, I'll just focus on one, that this current operating budget that's been proposed is about $300,000 more than the Public Works budget that we agreed on. And I don't know, I agree that education and providing and the staffing and all the services and all the funding, the activities, and it just seems a bit loaded for me in terms of overall proportional. I guess I just don't understand.
If somebody wants to speak to that, they're welcome to. Mr. Pan?
Well, Public Works operates with a very different kind of structural model. A lot of it is essentially using state funds, and so the amount that we have to work with in Public Works is more about the staffing, which is considerably smaller, I believe, and certain periodic equipment needs. At the library, the substantial portion of our expenses are personnel. 3/4 of our budget is personnel. We then have to spend money on maintenance of the buildings. That is not part of the Public Works budget. We also have to buy books, other kinds of materials for circulation and reference. All of those things are part of what we spend, and I'm not sure that there's really a one-to-one comparison that's possible between the two.
Thank you. Is there further discussion on library services? I see no hands. We will come to a vote. This is a majority vote. We are voting on the motion before you on the screen. All those in favor of the motion for library services, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, please say no. Library services passes by majority. Thank you, Library Board. You may leave the front table. We are now leaving Article 12 until May 7th when we get back to it. So once the Select Board comes back to the front table, we will move on to Article 13. Oh, you're right. 13 was consent calendar. You already moved on to that one. I was just seeing if you were paying attention. Can we get Article 14 up on the board because we already passed 13? Sorry I tricked you before there. And I call on Mr. Slaughter to make a motion.
I move that the town appropriate $1,411,800 to purchase, repair, and/or install new or replacement equipment, and to meet such appropriation, $1,065,200 be raised by taxation, and $346,600 be transferred from the ambulance receipts reserve for appropriation account.
Do I hear a second? I do. You may speak to your motion.
Before I speak specifically to equipment capital items, I'm going to talk about the capital planning process in general and part of how these articles that are coming up come before you. The Joint Capital Planning Committee is comprised of 8 members, 2 from the Finance Committee, 2 from the Select Board, 2 from the Library Trustees, and 2 from the School Committee. These 8 people meet through the early part of the year to review the capital projects for the upcoming fiscal year, as well as look at the 5-year requests for capital improvements to the town. Earlier in town meeting, not tonight, but I think the previous night, someone brought up the question of buildings and planning around buildings and renovations, construction, et cetera, et cetera. This is part and parcel of some of what the capital planning group looks at. And when things are to be formally sort of brought to town meeting for the purpose of either borrowing or seeking funds for feasibility studies and the like are generally run through capital planning process with the Joint Capital Planning Committee. We do hear from a variety of people. We hear from people that like the Community Preservation Act Committee, and while we don't actually vote on their monies, we do like to hear about those projects. They're often done in concert with a capital plan and fit within the context of capital planning, and so we like to hear about those things from the various boards and committees that have financial capital planning in their process as well. So we do like to hear about those things. We put those into the mix with our consideration of capital planning projects, regardless of what kind. So we do try to keep an eye on and a finger on the pulse of those things that are coming before the town in the coming years. The Joint Capital Planning Committee report to town meeting, which I believe was in one of the packets that was mailed to you. It is also available online on the town website in combination with the Finance Committee booklet. Both give you a considerable amount of information about the capital planning projects for the current year, as well as those projected out into 5 years. It's a considerable amount of money that is involved with capital planning. It is money that we set aside and use for larger ticket items, as well as processes that don't normally fit within our operating budgets. The financial policies of the town, which is another thrilling read if you have trouble sleeping some night, that the Finance Committee put together, has a target of 10% of the tax levy as the capital plan amount that we'd like to use. This current year's budget that we're going to propose to you has about a 7.5% use of the levy for that. We have not, I believe, ever reached the 10% mark, and we have been as low as about 6% in more recent years. When that happens, we are not funding our capital plans, we're not keeping up with our maintenance on our buildings and our facilities and our equipment and our roads, and all those different pieces factor into that capital plan. All that being said, in particular for us at this point in time is the equipment portion of the capital planning program. It's on page 54 of your Finance Committee book, where we list out all the different items that are in this coming fiscal year's capital plan for equipment. The Finance Committee voted 6-0 to recommend this to you, and the Joint Capital Planning Committee also voted unanimously to recommend this to you.
Thank you. As you may have figured out from that, Mr. Slaughter was actually first speaking as a representative of the Joint Capital Planning Committee, but he segued right into speaking as representative of the Finance Committee. Good job. I now call on Mr. Wald from the Select Board. Do you have a statement?
Yes, thank you. The Select Board on April 7th voted unanimously to recommend the article in this amount, and I should say I'm speaking also as a member of the Joint Capital Planning Committee. Just a few words by preface. We have a very brief statement at the back of the room, but Mr. Slaughter very nicely explained the process, and I just want to reemphasize 2 things. You know, the fiscal restraint in every year, plus the part of a 5-year plan, and the goal of increasing the capital, the share of capital that we're setting aside. One of the things you should know also is that we've become increasingly creatures of good habit and discipline as we've gone forward the last few years. And so departments know now that they know that money is tight. They bring us a very disciplined budget. Everyone works very well to plan rigorously. And so this year we were able to grant all the requests we received. In many years we get a much larger number of requests than we have money for. So that's why you're seeing the numbers before you from these different departments. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a majority vote requirement. You can see the line item details of the capital program equipment Article 14 on page 54 of the Finance Committee booklet. And again, I'm not going to go through line item by line item. I'm just going to open up for discussion. If people have questions or discussion on specific items, you can just do them in any order you want. Is there any discussion on Article 14 before we come to a vote? Yes, right here in front.
James Scott, Precinct 7. Sounds like an awfully gold-plated snowblower at $4,000.
Anybody want to comment on the cost of the snowblower? Looks like we've got somebody coming up from the back to talk about snowblowers. You may come forward. Or identify yourself and then speak to the question.
George Hicks, Facility Supervisor for the Jones. It's actually orange and not gold-plated. The goal was, my preference was to buy a nice heavy-duty piece of commercial equipment that would last at least as long as our existing piece, which lasted 30 years. I could buy a lesser quality machine from Home Depot or Lowe's, but we'd probably be looking at replacing it within 5 to 10 years. So I'm looking for longevity with that machine.
Thank you. Further discussion? Yes, in the back there.
Pat Church, Precinct 5. I have a question about the new electric vehicle to be used primarily by the IT department. I guess I couldn't find any more details. I'm wondering if where the IT department goes, that it needs an electric vehicle, and does this replace them using their own vehicle, or what's the situation there? And it says it'll also be used shared with other departments for town business. Can someone elucidate?
Mr. Pooler.
Thank you, Sandy Pooler, Finance Director. The IT department services multiple buildings around town. They deliver computers back and forth, and so they're traveling on a regular basis to various town buildings and bringing equipment with them. So they do need something to transport them. We've in the past done things like handed down old police cruisers and so forth, but now that we're a green community, we can't do that anymore. There have been occasions when IT staff have used their own cars. That came sort of to a crashing end when one of our employees got involved in a very serious accident in his car with substantial damage to that car, and became much less willing to use his car to do that. So we think that in keeping with this being a green town and meeting the needs of the department, an electric vehicle is the way to go, and it will have the added benefit of matching this with some state grant funds that will allow us to install a charging station that this vehicle can be used, can charge up at, but also members of the public who have electric cars can charge up there. And then finally, just to answer the last part of your question, there are occasions where there are other staff members of town who occasionally need vehicles, and so the idea is that this is not just the IT's department's vehicle, but it's to be shared by other people if they have to go to a meeting someplace and may not have their own car, or for whatever reason, it seems like an economical way to get people around.
Thank you. Is there further discussion? Yes, right there, fourth row.
Hi, Susan Rosnoy, Precinct 9. I just wonder if the security cameras on the school buses are a requirement. As the buses go past my house, there's hardly anybody in them.
Yes, Mr. Slaughter.
So one of the reasons for that particular capital item is it's being a bit proactive in some respects. The camera setups in those buses would actually be 3 cameras, 1 on the outside, 1 and 2 on the inside. They monitor the kids coming up the stairs on the bus, the back of the bus, and then on the outside, if people decide to bypass the bus against the stop sign that comes outside the bus. So the purpose of using surveillance cameras like that, it's not that people are going to sit and watch them. It would be only if something were to come up that they would review the tape, not tape, the recording, I should say. The other motivation behind getting this is that it is not currently required. It is, however, on the minds of people and on the minds of legislatures. I believe in the state of Rhode Island, it's required to have a person on the bus, which is decidedly more expensive because you pay their salary plus their benefits, plus their retirement benefits, et cetera, et cetera. So if we are able to be proactive and use camera systems to help us to keep our buses safe, keep our children safe on those buses, identify potential people that are skirting the traffic laws regarding buses, then that's the motivation behind having these cameras.
Is there further discussion before we come to a vote? I see no hands. We will now come to a vote on the motion before us for Article 14, Capital Program Equipment. This is a majority vote. All those in favor of the motion under, oops, let's get back up there. All those in favor of the motion under Article 14, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, please say no. No. The ayes have it with a majority. And it is 9:56, so we are moving on to Article 15. Why not? We're doing great, folks. Let's keep moving. Mr. Slaughter.
I move that the town appropriate $633,000 to repair and or improve buildings and facilities, and to meet such appropriation, $573,000 be raised by taxation, and $60,000 be transferred from the fund balance reserve for overlay surplus account.
Do I hear a second? I hear a second. You may speak to your motion.
I will speak again for both the Joint Capital Planning Committee and the Finance Committee on this. Both recommend this to you unanimously. On page 55 of your Finance Committee book, you will see the items listed that are included in this article. The couple of things that I'd like to point out with regard to this, you'll notice that part of the funding is from the, let me read it again, the Fund Balance Reserve for Overlay Surplus account. We use a variety of sources to fund capital. In this particular case, this is some money that is set aside each year for both the tax abatement programs that we have, as well as any challenges to the assessments that people have and are found in their favor. When all of those outstanding claims against that overlay surplus are cleared, there potentially can be surplus. That surplus can be returned to the general fund, or in this case, we're going to use it to help fund a consultant to help with the revaluation process that happens this year. Every 3 years, we're required to do that. There are other things that fall in buildings and facilities, which you'll see in other capital item articles in the warrant. While we consider all of those in, sort of together as we do the work as joint capital planning, they are distinct for a variety of reasons, and we'll get into those as we cover those articles. Again, the Finance Committee and Joint Capital Planning Committee voted unanimously to recommend this to you.
Thank you. Mr. Wald for the Select Board.
Thank you. The Select Board on April 7th voted unanimously to support this. And again, just to echo what Mr. Slaughter said, the use of the overlay account to fund the triennial revaluation is traditional, and that's why it shows up in the capital account, capital line rather than somewhere else.
Thank you. This is a majority vote. You can see the line items for Article 15 on page 55 of the Finance Committee booklet. And we are open for discussion. Is there any discussion on Article 15? And yes, back there, second row from the back.
Paige Wilder, Precinct 10. I wonder if someone could speak to the barn roof at Fort River School and what that barn is used for?
Who do we have? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Slaughter.
I'll save Mr. Bahanowitz a long trip down here, but there's a barn in front of Fort River School. It's white, and it's used to store a variety of things for the school district, replacement tires for some of the equipment, various other storage, that sort of thing. In order to maintain the barn and keep the things that are in it in good order, we need to keep the roof in order, and that's the barn that as you drive into the Fort River School is on the left in front of the school.
Further discussion? Yes, over there, third row. Or fourth row.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Jim Brissett, Precinct 6. There was an item in here for the Jones Library carpet repair, and I just wonder if that's still a necessary item, since we just voted to approve money to look into renovations at the Jones, and if it's possible to not do those in light of that, if that money could then be added into the sidewalks amount.
Yes, you want to come speak on this, or you can stay back there and use the microphone. Just identify yourself again.
George Hicks, Facility Supervisor, Jones Library. The carpet repair is actually for the North Amherst branch and not for the Jones Library branch.
Thank you. Further discussion? Yes, second row right there.
Janet Chevin, Precinct 7. My question is about sidewalks, $30,000. It says sidewalks around town. Is that for sidewalk repair or is that for new sidewalks? I'm particularly interested because about 25 years ago, the head of DPW indicated that there was going to be a sidewalk along Pomeroy Lane so that all of us could walk to the Bunsen Library. I'm still waiting for that sidewalk.
Mr. Mooring.
That wasn't me. So the $30,000, we use it for different things. We do some new sidewalks where we're connecting small pieces together, and we use a lot for reconstruction. A lot of that $30,000 is reconstruction, and it helps augment the Chapter 90 money and to go to places that just need to be redone.
Thank you. Further discussion? Yes, way in the back there.
Janet McGowan, Precinct 8. Speaking of sidewalks, at the Atkins Corner meeting, almost everybody there wanted to see more sidewalks, particularly along Bay Road from, I'm too tired to remember the name of the assisted living center there and apartments for the elderly. Applewood, thank you. And one of the questions was how much would it cost to put that in, or how much per foot for new sidewalks? And that had come up over and over, and I was wondering if there was a number we could attach to that and maybe look at it and see that there next year at town meeting in this budget.
Mr. Mooring.
I cannot guarantee if you can see it next meeting, or next town meeting. We are working on that. We had a rough plan we put together. We have not taken that plan out for public comment yet, but it is a substantial amount of sidewalks, and there's actually bus improvements that go along with PVTA or UMass transit requests as well.
Further discussion on Article 15? Yes, right there.
Ruth Hazard, Precinct 3. Could someone speak to the townwide GIS mapping and what that would do, and the triennial reevaluation consulting services?
Somebody prepared to speak to that? Yes, Mr. Wall.
Just briefly on the GIS, this is a updating of our floodplain mapping, which is important, obviously, for issues such as development, zoning, insurance. We have to know where people can build things safely. And basically, I think as Mr. Tucker used to put it, the old maps gave us a very accurate reading of inaccurate data. The technology is now much more sophisticated, and Mr. Zomek can help me out if I missed something. But this was begun some years ago, and basically $52,000 completes the job we began earlier, as I understand it. If that makes sense to you.
Is there further discussion? Yes, right there.
Mary Streeter, Precinct 8. I'm noticing that the police station has $25,000 for sidewalk and fixing the front door, which doesn't close properly, and $30,000 for the rest of all the sidewalks in town. I go to CPA meetings about twice a month at the police station, and I've never noticed a problem with the sidewalk. And I'm just wondering what went into the decision to give so much for the police station sidewalk and so little for the rest of the sidewalks in town.
Oh, go on, come on forward then. Please identify yourself to the meeting when you get up there.
Ron Bahanowitz, the Director of Facilities for the Town of Amherst and the schools. Ron Bahanowitz, the Director of Facilities for the Town of Amherst and the schools as well, and the Regional School District and Pelham Schools. The $25,000 for the police station, actually there are heaved sidewalks there, and they come up and down every single winter. The sidewalk in front of the police station is a heated sidewalk. 3 of the 4 panels that are there are operative and 1 is broken. It's going to take electrical work as well as concrete work to fix the heaves out front there, and they are a trip hazard right this second. I can tell you that I replaced some sidewalks this past year, not a whole lot bigger than what is at the police station at the Fort River School, and the cost was $15,000 for the concrete work. We have to pay prevailing wages, union wages, and it costs a lot of money. That's all I can tell you.
Thank you. Further discussion? Yeah, point of order. Wait for a microphone, please.
Is this about the reval?
First, let's get the microphone working.
I'll answer her question.
And I will recognize you to repeat your second question.
Ruth Hazard, Precinct 3. The question was about the triennial reevaluation consulting services and what that means.
Mr. Pooler.
Every 3 years, the town is required to do a revaluation of all of the property to meet the requirements of the State Department of Revenue. We are bringing in a consultant who will help, particularly with looking at the personal property, which is the business equipment that is in various businesses. It's an enormous amount of work to do a reval, and it's quite typical that you use consultants at your triennial revaluation to take on parts of that. So the town has done this in the past for other revaluations, and again, we use the money, as we have in the past, from the overlay account to pay for that.
Thank you. Is there further discussion on Article 15? Yes, sir, right there.
Jim Perrott, Precinct 1. What is the basement renovations at the North Amherst School?
Yes, you may speak to that.
North Amherst School was the previous survival center in the basement. When the survival center moved out, they left, they took all of their equipment and so forth, and where we are right now is the building in the basement needs to be, I don't want to use the word spruced up, but it needs to be repaired because it was a kitchen, so there's some plumbing that needs to be removed from it, and we need to make it so that it is a space that it can be inhabited. We'd like to take that space and make it such that we put some kind of low-impact social services into that space. So it's to make it so we can rent it out.
Thank you. Yes, I see a hand over there.
Last town meeting, there was a lot of discussion about what to do with that building.
I'm sorry, could you identify yourself, please?
I'm sorry, Tracy Lee Boutillier, Precinct 6. And I recall quite a bit of discussion about the use of that building and the basement and, just what we could do with it. And we were told that it was going to be used for storage, I believe, for town files, not to rent out for other agencies and uses. Has that changed?
Mr. Bahana.
We have several uses currently in that building right now. The upper floor is used for the family center. It's a youth from birth through 3 years old services where it's run by, in collaboration with the University of Massachusetts, is upstairs. We have the downstairs, half of the downstairs currently this minute, all of the records that were stored in Ruxton's barn is actually in the basement already, and this is the other half of the basement. So there's another space there, and this part of the basement is actually already ADA accessible, so it's a prime piece of real estate. So our records are there, and we also are renting out the upstairs. Back approximately a year ago, the federal government, with their sequester, took the money away from, there was community action childcare there. And when they left, I kept asking them, are you going to come back? Are you going to come back? They were fantastic tenants. They served a great purpose for us in the community. And they went away. And in the meantime, the family center came to us and asked if they could go in. And we are currently renting the space to the family center. And lo and behold, the community action has come back, and they are trying to find some space again in Amherst because they've gotten some funding back now. But we also have, just as an example, community action at our 61 Strong Street is there.
Thank you. Is there further discussion under Article 15? I see no hands. Looks like we're ready to come to a vote. We are voting on the motion before us on the screen. This is a majority vote. All those in favor of the motion under Article 15, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, please say no. The ayes have it by a majority. Before I call on Mr. Hayden, I want to remind everybody again to do a great cleanup. Clean up your stuff, clean up other people's stuff. Let's leave the room spotless. Thank you. Mr. Hayden, do you have a motion?
I do. I will move to continue debate after 10 o'clock.
Is there any discussion on that? Is there any second on that?
I just want to point out that we have one more article from the JCPC to consider, the last one.
Okay. Is there any discussion? Are we ready to come to a vote? All those in favor of continuing debate, please say aye. All those opposed, please say no. No. The noes have it. Mr. Hayden, try another motion.
I move to adjourn until Monday at 7 o'clock.
All those in favor of the motion to adjourn, please say aye. All opposed, please say no. Motion passes. We are adjourned until Monday, May 5th. Thank you.